WFH with two guys. Now here's Benny and Dennis.
So Dennis, one of the things that comes up with me, and I say more frequently than not, has to do with like the legal aspect of business. And sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes it can be absolutely imperative, especially if you're got a new contract with a client that needs to be involved. But having a good attorney to help you out, I found to be totally invaluable.
I agree. I mean, because again, most business people, when they're starting out, don't think about all the legal ramifications. Also, you could have one where you've got a full-time job, but you want to do something on the side, and you've got to think about, okay, how does that all play in? What, can I legally do this? What's going on? What are the ramifications that impact my employer, impact me? And so those are things I think people are asking, especially if you're thinking about starting a job, a new company, or starting a business, and you've got something going on where you still need the revenue from the existing employer.
So we're going to have one of the better legal minds certainly here with us today. So Darshan, thanks for coming on the podcast. We appreciate it.
I'm a little concerned, Benny. You said better legal minds. I thought there was someone else who was coming on as well.
Yeah. Well, we, between me and Dennis, we definitely are not the legal mind for sure, but we definitely wanted to have an expert who could come in here and tell us a little bit about this. One of the things that I know that when I was starting out my company, I actually had to jump in both feet. And I know there are a lot of people out there who listen to the podcast who are thinking about starting a side hustle, starting some type of side project, but they worry about what that looks like, not only from a legal standpoint, but just in general, how to do this. So, this is a topic that, I can address a little bit from the business side, but from the legal side, I don't even know where to begin. I mean,
I'm curious, Benny, you say you can address this from the business side. Before we get into the legal stuff, are you seeing a lot of your employees who want to do side jobs, and what's really popping up?
For me personally, I don't actually have a lot of employees. Most of my employees, when I hire out a bunch of people, they are doing this kind of as a side gig. For some of my peers who do own companies, some of the topics that we have, and this is something I did want to talk to you about. Like maybe they're a web designer, or maybe they write content for a marketing company, and they think they want to, use that expertise as a side hustle, right? But they're a little concerned about breach of contract, or, if my employer would allow me, or as an employer, do I let my employees do this? Is this a good idea? And so, people have approached me and asked, can I do this? Am I going to get in trouble? I don't know what the legal ramifications would be.
Yeah, no, and Benny, same thing. I have very few employees, but I have several 1099s that work for me that either do this as a full-time gig and they work with many other companies, or they have a full-time job and then this is their side gig, and their goal is that, hey, maybe this can grow into something more lucrative, and eventually I leave that full-time job. And a lot of times the full-time job offers the benefits or insurance that in a startup world, I'm not going to provide insurance if they're 1099 and those kinds of things. So I think those are questions that the employer has and the employee has. I think it's both sides of the equation.
I think you're 100% right. And I think that's exactly what I want to point out. The fact is, first of all, I think people come at the law as if it's this esoteric set of rules that no one has thought of, and there's a gotcha in there. And I say that because that's how I thought before I went to law school. You guys outlined were like the big things you should probably be thinking about anyways, which is, how should an employer think about it? How should an employee think about it? What are the things that might pop up that might scare me? So usually when I try to approach this, I start off, I think about context. So for example, let's say I'm coming from the employee standpoint. I think about how I started. I am a pharmacist. I'm a fully qualified pharmacist. I worked for many, many years, for like 2 decades as a pharmacist. While doing that, I went to law school and I started working as a lawyer part-time. And one of the big questions I had was, well, can I do this? Turns out I could, and I did for a long time. However, literally in this last week, there was a case of a lawyer who lost his law license because of something he did as a pharmacist. Because it was the opioid crisis, and I think he was dispensing medications without appropriately checking them. And he was signing off saying that it's okay to do. So my first thing to think about is, does doing one job affect another job? So keep that in mind as you continue. The next thing I start thinking about is, okay, let's say we're coming from the perspective of the potential employee. What kind of employment agreement did you sign with your employer? Did your employer come in and say, you know what, all your time belongs to me? If that's what you signed up for, and some employers will say that that's what you signed up for. Some employers will say, you know what, I want you 9 to 5. I need your full attention on it. In that situation, you need to look at what's called shop rights, which basically means if you use any of the company's resources, which means a laptop, which could mean even a light source that they give you. It could mean their Dropbox folder, whatever you're talking about. If you start using it, the company will say, that's our property. In fact, the fact that you're working during business hours is our property. If you're paid to invent, let's say you were a researcher. I do a lot of work with medical devices. I do a lot of work with scientists. Let's say you're a researcher and you were hired by Pfizer to go out there and do a bunch of research for them. And then you decide to go back home and you have this one brilliant idea that's going to make a multi-billion-dollar compound. You can't go, oh, I made that on my own time. And that's job number 2. They might say, no. You were hired to invent things you did after 5. Maybe you should have done during the work day. And that belongs to us as well. So those are some initial thoughts I'd be thinking about. There are other elements that I can pull into place. For example, one of the areas that's been really, really interesting. So we have all been following this idea of the FinCEN rule. Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah.
I don't know when this podcast will come out, but it's pretty recent for all of us right now. But it felt like at one point it was literally every day the rule was changing. They would have first, for those people who don't know what we're talking about, the SEC came out and said, if you have any ownership in a business, the business has to disclose who the owners are. It came from a good place. It came from, you know what, we don't want to have foreign agents controlling things in the U.S. in an inappropriate way. Sounds good. Well, at some point it gets ridiculous. Like if I'm a mom and pop store and I barely have time to make ends meet, now I'm registering with the government for what purpose? Like, is it really any of your business? And it went back and forth. The courts kept changing the rule on whether you have to register or not. But the point is, at this moment, you don't need to register. Like last week, you did. So keep that in mind. You need to be tracking. You need to consider whether you're going to register and incorporate as a company. If you're an employee or if you are a separate company, you might choose that you don't want to carry the right insurance and you're going to be operating as a solo, and that's okay. But remember that you might have liability concerns. I can keep going, but I feel like I'm doing like a soliloquy. But any questions?
And I think this is the stuff, again, especially if people are starting a new business, they don't think about a lot of this stuff. Or they, and it's like, I always said the 2 people you need when you start off is an attorney and a good accountant. Because there's things, both of those, they may crisscross on a few things, but they're going to help you avoid some of the pitfalls. Because again, there's some of the things where, like you mentioned, if you've got a 1099, but you're really dictating what they do and controlling their hours, they're really an employee. And at some point, the IRS is going to probably say, those aren't 1099s, those are employees, and that you've got to pay taxes on their wages. And they can be not real nice about that if they want.
Exactly right. I think I'd go one step further. There was actually a situation where, for example, if you're doing your insurance requirements, your insurance may actually say that you need to cover your 1099s even.
Right.
Because we don't think they are going to be appropriately covered, so you need to cover them. If you're directing the work that they're doing, telling them what time, what place, when to do it, yeah, you know what? They're not 1099s anymore. States have their own specific rules, so you might have, under the IRS rule, we think it's okay, but California comes out and says, No. If you're directing people a specific way and they're doing certain things, Uber, suddenly all those people, they're employees. They're not contractors anymore.
Right. And so I think that, especially as a business owner, those are things to think about. Many of you, the listeners, you already are aware of this, but if you're starting a new business, there's things you just don't even think about as you're doing a lot of this. The other one too is you can have clients that require those employees to have signed agreements, or the 1099s signed agreements, because they need to validate that what they're doing work on isn't going to be shared outside of your business. And so there's BAA agreements, and there's all these other things that you don't think about when you're starting out, but you've got to sign all those things, and you've got to make sure you keep those up to date. And a lot of people don't take that in consideration.
If you're talking on medical data, you absolutely may be called on to sign a BA, and you need to figure out whether you actually want to sign a BA. People think, oh, you know what? It's just another agreement. Let's just sign it. Let's get to the important part of doing things. Turns out if you sign a BAA, what you're really saying is, I have a huge compliance program behind me that's going to do all this privacy work, and it's making sure that your data is safe. Usually you're going, I don't have any of that. I just signed the agreement because it was put in front of me. And that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't sign things willy-nilly. Just be careful about what you're signing.
And as a business owner, that's sometimes when you're competing against another company, they'll come in lower because they aren't following the rules. And that's always something, if you're doing a proposal or whatever, and you're really following the rules, to highlight that, because sometimes the decision maker on the other end just assumes they've all got that stuff. And because I have a client right now that was competing with somebody else for another job, and they came in half the price. Well, we're finding out they didn't have all the right information, and the people that picked number one is not happy because number two actually met all the requirements. It looked more expensive, but it met all the requirements that was in their RFP and stuff. So
it goes both ways, though, doesn't it? And I say this as someone who goes, because I have clients who do this all the time, right? This idea that I want the lowest price, but I want everything met. And the question is, when you signed up for that lowest price, did you know that your deal was too good to be true?
Exactly.
And should you have known that, maybe, like, I just read this, I read Reddit for those people who like reading Reddit. And Reddit has two communities that I think are really interesting. The first one, I think, is one called Overemployed, which is very much in what we're talking about. And they talk about how they can fool the employer and have job 1 and job 2 and job 3 and job 4. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure your employer knows, but don't lie. And that's going to come back to haunt you. Because that's the basis on which people at like Facebook were being fired, because people were holding multiple jobs. They're like, no, when you work from home, you're supposed to work for us. And now you have job 2 and job 3 saying that you're not doing that. And that's why people are getting fired. The other one was, I think today's Reddit post on like entrepreneur or something. And it went, someone reached out to me and said, we want to build a company like Zillow, but for cars. I think that's what they said it was. And okay, great. So we went out, we spec'd it, we did a bunch of work. We came out, we looked at this and we said, you know what? 60,000 might cover it. Then we did a little bit, bunch of work. We came back and it turns out it's more like 100,000. We went back to him and said, yeah, we're looking at about $100,000. We've done about 15 hours worth of work. So we just need you to sign off and let's get going. And the guy laughed in their face and said, I was thinking I can get a car in that. Like, I'd pay only like 5,000 at maximum for this work. So there was this entire mismatch of what the client wanted versus what you wanted. Make sure that you're having those conversations, and maybe you should know better. Like, no one knew how this discussion should have been organized, and a good contract will handle that for you. A good scoping discussion will handle that for you. A good Dennis and a good Benny will handle that for you. To understand how that conversation should happen and what to look out for.
And I always tell people, have the conversation when things are good and have it documented, because when the train goes off the track and you don't have a documented process or how you're going to deal with things, that's when it gets ugly. And it's much easier to do it when you're happy with each other. And that goes for the employer, company to vendor, or company to whoever you're selling to. Make sure it's documented, and make sure, and don't assume things. That's why you need an attorney to help kind of review those and make sure it represents you the best you can. And there's give and take, because there's times where the other person that's signing is pushing back on something, and that's where you need that attorney to say, yeah, it's okay to give that up. Or if you give that up, understand here's the risk that you're accepting. And a lot of times the business owner just doesn't think that perspective.
I think it's really interesting because I was just involved in a situation where someone, their employment got terminated. And it was a completely different situation. Obviously, we're talking about doing job 1 and job 2, but no one ever talks about what happens when the job ends, whether it's because you got fired, whether it's because of something else. What will it look like when you get fired? Do you have COBRA? Do you have, like, how will your health insurance continue? What about your 401k? All of these things need to be given a little bit of thought to. Like, when you start with job 2, are you going to get authorization from your employer to do that? Or are you just going to start on your own? There are overall, just to the point you're making, Dennis, I think what you pointed out is this idea that you want, you want to choose the contract and do the contract when everything's happy and hunky-dory. The problem is, and the good news is, when everything's happy and hunky-dory, the contract doesn't even need to be there. Because the truth is, no one cares. We're going to figure this out. Everyone's in that spirit of, we'll figure this out. The only time the contract becomes valuable, so it's worth toilet paper when you don't need to figure it out. Then something goes wrong. And that's when the contract's really important.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. And that applies to every single agreement. Doesn't matter if it's employee to employer, company selling or buying. I always tell people, it's like when you're dating, it's always hunky-dory. It's when it comes time for divorce, that was never thought of when you said, hey, will you marry me? But you kind of have to be thinking about that, because there's something that could go wrong in the future.
I mean, this is kind of, I was thinking about this, and I'm always thinking about this from the employer standpoint. There's a point of, like, overreach, right? And because I think there's a lot of employers that think, well, I'm just going to have everyone sign NDAs and they work. Now, listen, if you're doing research and you're coming up with a chemical compound that's going to be world-changing, cures a bunch of diseases, okay. But Jimmy John's had it that you had to sign an NDA. I don't know if you know this, Dennis. Darshan is nodding a nose, but you actually have to sign an NDA that you won't work for any company that does like 10% of what of their business comes from what they do, which is what? I mean, if I'm a sandwich maker and I can't go in, that's like, what are they thinking? I don't know. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. I think there's overreach at times, because I have one of my it's a company that provides 1099s with us, that they're in different parts of the U.S. and in Canada and others, and he's got a non-compete. I'm like, they're 1099s to you. You can't sign a non-compete, because in theory they could do other things. It doesn't make sense, because it's kind of like the sandwich shop thing. It's like, it's not going to hold up in court, because you're not doing anything that's secretive or special. If they were making compounds for a pharmacy that was earth-shattering research, that would be a different story. But if they're just doing general work, such as making sandwiches or coding stuff, it's not going to hold up in court for the most part, probably.
So, a few different things. So, non-competes are a special area that a lot of people are paying attention to right now. And the reason for it is exactly what Benny and you are talking about, Dennis. This idea that, I thought it was Subway, but it could have been Jimmy John's for all I know. I can't remember which one. It's a Subway shop, basically. And they were having these employees just making sandwiches, and they were suddenly asked to sign these non-competes. They were like, I can't move anywhere because no one else will hire me to make a sandwich. Well, that's ridiculous. And that speaks to the overreach you were talking about. However, it also applies to doctors. And one of the things, so the FTC came out and said, you know what? No non-competes for anyone. Everyone gets to go out, do their own jobs. And these hospitals in the Midwest we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars finding these doctors, recruiting them, paying them a bonus to come back to wherever, in the middle of rural Ohio. And if they can just leave whenever they want, well, what's my incentive to do all of that? How do I take care of my patients if they can leave whenever after all of my investment? So that rule, again, like that FinCEN rule I was talking about a little bit ago, has gone back and forth. You now have circuit splits. I think Texas has put a pause on it. I think Pennsylvania actually had said that, you know what, that's good to go. In fact, Pennsylvania came out earlier this year in 2025 and had a rule saying that we are going to allow non-competes to stop working for certain healthcare providers, like physicians. So check your state and local laws. They will decide whether a non-compete applies.
Benny, thoughts as your experience in all this?
It's funny, both from we played the roles of having to understand it from both the employee and the employer side. And it's just such a fine line, right? You're going to lose especially, the higher brain power requires to do a particular job and the more restriction you're going to get, you're going to turn off those valuable employees. And likewise too, the employees need to kind of weigh that out. Look, if you're going into a company with the idea of pilfering or stealing a client, hey, come on, that ain't good. But at the same time too, I'm not going to deny anyone the right. Shoot, Dennis and I, if we hadn't worked for companies at one point, we would have been able to start our own companies. And that's all part of what it is. I think that this is an ongoing topic that there's ever going to be a right answer for us. But the idea of just doing the research and understanding it, and this is why we need people like Darshan who can help us navigate this, and what's the best for our company, and what's the best for me if I'm going to do something that requires a little bit. Darshan, this is really obviously we're just scratching the scratch. We haven't even there's so many other topics that while you and Dennis were talking, I just wrote down a bunch of notes here. I think we need to have you come back. So thank you very much for spending some time with us. And I know some folks out there who are listening who are going to have some questions for you. Maybe something that they're thinking about leaving the company they're working for, or they're thinking about hiring some people and incorporating some language into their contracts. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Darshan?
So you could always go to just my website, www.kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. And you'll be able to find me. I'm on LinkedIn and everything else, but let's keep it simple.
Cool.
Absolutely. Well, Darshan Kulkarni from the Kulkarni Law Firm, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. Definitely a great topic, and you've definitely opened up our eyes. I know that for sure. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining
Absolutely.
us. We enjoyed it. This is great.
Well, Dennis, that's another podcast in the can. I know that a lot of you all want to know how to get in touch with us. Dennis, what's the best way for folks to be able to get a hold of you?
Yeah, email's by far the best for me. It's Dennis J, so DENNISJ @worksolution.com, and that's WORX solution, no S at the end, so solution.com. Benny, how about you?
Yeah, same thing. Get a hold of me. My email address is benny@velocitytechnology.group. That's BENNY @velocitytechnology.group. Also, for me and Dennis, you can find us on LinkedIn. Look for us on LinkedIn. Our Work From Home with Two Guys is on LinkedIn. And we also have a website, WFH2guys.com. Look us up. You'll find all the past episodes and some little bits of information that maybe we don't get a chance to talk to on the podcast. We put it out there too as well.
And definitely share us with your friends and people in your network.
Absolutely. Let us know what we can do to make this podcast your podcast. Give us some ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, let us know. We'll talk to you guys soon.
You've been listening to WFH with Two Guys. We'll see you next time.